This is the follow-up from the 2nd Florida's advance to the Emmitsburg Road on July 2nd, 1863. We begin this segment at approximately 7 p.m. when the Federal forces break and withdraw towards Cemetery Ridge. On the first slide, I have listed the Confederate forces that will take place at 7 p.m. Wilcox and Wright's brigade, I have only listed the units to the right and left of Lang's brigade. The number to the right is the strength of each individual unit at the beginning of the battle. This is the Federal forces at 7 p.m. on July 2nd. These Federal forces that I have listed here are the ones that were at the Emmitsburg Road, and the infantry units and the artillery are the ones that will withdraw as the Confederate forces cross the Emmitsburg Road. You can see that the artillery units, I have listed the name of each individual battery are the key players in this. And throughout the presentation, I will refer to them by their name as opposed to their unit designation. On this particular slide, I am pointing out the gap that General Hancock would have observed at approximately 7 p.m. or even before. If you take a look at the right of this photograph, you'll see the Cadore farm. The closest Federal units to the right, out of sight of this picture, are two Federal regiments to the north along the Emmitsburg Road. If we look over to the left, we'll see that I have listed in red the Confederate forces. Right in the gap is the 2nd Florida. Immediate to the left of the 2nd Florida is the 8th Florida, and in close to Rogers Farm is the 5th Florida. They take up that entire area there that I measured off when I was at Gettysburg. I also list in blue the regiments of the Federal forces that are at the Emmitsburg Road. To get your attention back to the right, one part of this puzzle that I did not put in there is right out towards the camera, close to the Cadore Road, is Weir's battery that is initially behind the Cadore barn, firing southwest into Wilcox and Lang's brigade as they approach the Emmitsburg Road. Weir moves the battery about 400 yards east or towards the camera, closer to Cemetery Ridge to avoid capture as the Confederates cross the road. This photo is the left or south of the previous photo. The Klingel farm, where Seeley's battery is located, is on the right with a little white building in the front of it. To the south is Barksdale's brigade attacking in a northeasterly direction. In his area is where the Federals will withdraw first, like dominoes falling. The woods is Plum Run in Wilcox area. Seeley and Turnbull will withdraw what guns they can salvage towards the ravine. They attempt to go back into action, but their infantry support is disorganized and they will abandon some more guns before heading north, paralleling Plum Run, to get to the Hummelball Lane, before they are cut off by approaching rebels from first Wilcox, then Lang's brigade. Officers try to rally the broken Federal regiments that withdrew from the Emmitsburg Road, but most flee east through the Plum Run thicket. This is Plum Run between Wilcox and Lang's brigades. The artillerymen realized they couldn't risk getting their guns and limbers through this mess. The ravine in this area is about 6 feet deep with steep banks. In order to get into the ravine, I had to cross a zigzag fence and make my way through thick brush for 20 or 30 feet. It hadn't rained for many days, but water ponded in shallow spots. I had to grab brush to pull myself up the steep bank and crashed through vines and brush for about another good 75 yards before crossing over another zigzag fence close to the monument where Colonel Willard was killed. You can't see the monument from Hancock Avenue, but it's close to the Minnesota monument and the area where some of the disorganized Federals will rally. Now we're back north in the area that the 2nd Florida is advancing. The Humble Lane is to the far left. In front of the lane is Plum Run, heading towards Emmitsburg Road. The 2nd Florida will be advancing slightly to our right, covering this whole area. Weir's battery and what is left of Turnbull's battery will take up position behind the camera. I am going to Plum Run and will stand in the ravine between the 2 bushes in this photo for the next 2 photos. The 8th and 5th Florida will be firing southeast into the flank of the withdrawing Federals. I'm standing in the bottom of Plum Run. It's only knee-deep at this location. I can lay down and be below ground level and safe from most firing from the north and northeast. There are many shallow depressions between the Humble Lane and the Kadori farm, but I would only use them as a last resort. I've turned around and am now facing Cemetery Ridge. Weir states that when he displaced from the Kadori farm, he moved 300 yards southeast and about 200 yards from the Humble Lane and Plum Run. What is left of Turnbull's battery will take position between Weir's guns and the Humble Lane, with Lieutenant Livingston now in charge of what is left of his battery. I placed some batteries in here just to represent what the Florida boys would have seen at about the same distance. This is what the 2nd Florida boys probably face coming closer to Cemetery Ridge in the background. Major Moore orders several dozen men to seize the guns. Because of losing too many horses, Weir can only withdraw 3 of his guns. So he orders his men to take the rammers so the rebels can't use the guns. Livingston's guns are also in jeopardy of capture. Some authors place Wright's brigade north of the Kadori farm. Some say the 22nd Georgia and the 2nd Georgia Battalion passed south. Either way, Wright's brigade is heading for the ridge in the top center of this photo. All authors tell of the Georgia boys that helped capture Weir's and Livingston's guns, which would be farther to the right off this photo. With a pair of binoculars, I can see the high water sign of Wright's furthest advance, which is below the white monument in the dark trees in the center of this photo. If the 22nd and 2nd Georgia Battalion went after Weir's guns, it looks to me, judging the terrain, Wright's brigade got scattered and he lost control of his regiments, but that's my opinion. What does come to light is the Georgia boys and the men from the 2nd Florida get into a brawl in the middle of the battle over who claims which guns. This is a continuation of Cemetery Ridge to the right of the previous photo. Over the ridge in the middle will arrive the 13th Vermont. The Vermont monument is the tall right one across Hancock Avenue. The 13th Vermont will move diagonally down to the lower right corner. The 13th Vermont is a part of 1st Corps commanded by General Doubleday after General Reynolds is killed the first day of battle. The regiment was sent south to recuperate after the first day's fighting. General Doubleday says he saw the situation and ordered the regiment to assist Hancock. But one of Hancock's aides states Hancock told the aide to go find more units, and he found and placed the Vermont regiment in line. We'll never know. What we do know, the regiment is a part of Brigadier General Stoddard's Vermont Brigade. that will contribute to next day's battle, but Standard is not mentioned as being on this area today. By now, Lang's brigade is exhausted and scattered and fighting in small groups. Lang has little choice but to halt and reform his disorganized lines and allow his men a few minutes to catch their breath before a final push up the western slope. Smoke is hanging low over the battlefield. Most of the men stoop under the smoke to see it, the units coming. Some might have noticed the 19th Maine advancing in two ranks in line of battle along the Hummelball Lane from the left of this photo. The main regiment will halt and lay down in the smoke between the large tree and the camera behind what is left of Weir and Livingston's abandoned guns. This is a slide of the Federal forces that will participate in what I call the counterattack at 8 p.m. You'll notice that throughout this presentation, I only refer to two time zones, 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. I'm speaking in generalities. On this particular slide, I have listed the two units that are going to influence the 2nd Florida. Also, where I have down at the bottom about the many batteries on top of Cemetery Ridge. This is because during all this action, in addition to Hancock trying to find units to plug the gap, a Brigadier General Hunt, who's in charge of the Army of the Potomac's artillery reserve, is gathering up batteries and placing them on top of Cemetery Ridge. Humphrey's disorganized division are those units that I had at 7 p.m. at the Emmitsburg Road, who are now back on the slope between Plum Run and what is today Hancock Avenue. They are being reorganized as best as can be, and they will also participate in retaking the ground that was lost. To the south, Barksdale's attack stalls and he withdraws. On the left of this photo is the statue of the 1st Minnesota along Hancock Avenue. In the brown grass in the center of the photo, the Minnesotans rushed toward Plum Run, firing into Wilcox's brigade. The 262 men charged Wilcox's men 3 times, stalling Wilcox until Willard's Federal Brigade arrived, which continued the domino effect of the rebel retreat. Wilcox realizes he will get no fresh troops coming to his aid, and he believes he has no choice but to break off the attack. To the northeast along Cemetery Ridge, the 19th Maine watches Lang's brigade trying to reform while the Federals lie and wait patiently. The 13th Vermont is now slightly behind and to the north of the Maine men. Hancock orders the 19th Maine to hit the Florida Brigade and the 13th Vermont to retake the lost guns of Weir and Livingston's batteries. The 13th Vermont is located up the slope in front of the obelisk, again along Hancock Avenue, and will come down towards the camera. During this time of the battle, Brigadier General Hunt is bringing more Federal batteries up on the ridge to support the infantry. As the Floridians renew their advance, they are hit by 14 Napoleons. The Floridians reel, but somehow they don't break. Instead, they lower their heads and, as if facing a heavy rainstorm, closed the gaps and continued forward. When the 19th Maine rose and fired, parts of the 2nd Florida are only 40 yards away. Major Moore's 2nd Florida are stopped for the time being, but they forced the 19th Maine back, and between volleys, both sides advance and then stagger back until one of them must give way. Meanwhile, Humphrey's disorganized regiments have rallied from their earlier withdrawal along the Emmitsburg Road and add to the Federal support, attacking Wilcox and the 5th Florida. Lang attempts to reform his brigade and continue the attack. An aide from the right informs him that Wilcox is forced back. The domino effect now hits Colonel Lang's Floridians. While his men are engaged on the left with the 19th Maine and the 13th Vermont, Lang moves south to see for himself and observes through the smoke and chaos blue uniforms passing his flank, where Wilcox should be. Fearing his brigade will be hit in enfilade or the enemy will get in the rear, he has no choice but to halt his advance and order his brigade to withdraw. The 2nd Florida conducts a fighting withdrawal. Not everyone in the regiment receives the order. The Confederate line immediately north of the 19th Maine was now a mixed bag of several regiments clustered together in small bunches as Wright's line further north begins its slow ascent toward the copse of trees. More Federal regiments arrive on the field. Carr's reorganized regiments of Humphreys' division resumed their advance towards the Emmitsburg Road. Some isolated rebels, mostly from the 2nd Florida, did not receive Colonel Lang's order to retire. They will be caught in the low ground and heavy growth to the south. The 13th Vermont recaptures Weir's guns, along with many 2nd Florida boys. The Vermonters proceed to the Cadore farm, then along the Emmitsburg Road as far as the Rogers farm. They recover 5 overrun Union artillery pieces. What was left of the 2nd Florida melted west to the Spangler Woods. As the sun sets in the west, the severely wounded Major Moore is placed on a stretcher and carried by 4 Florida prisoners into captivity. Captain Seton Fleming will take command of the 2nd Florida. Also, the Florida boys that earlier captured Weir's guns are ordered by their Federal guards to return them to Weir. Some say the fighting today will claim 75% of the casualties the 2nd Florida sustained during the 3-day battle at Gettysburg. As a postscript to the presentation I just gave, I put in this photograph that I came across of the monument to Hancock at the site where he was wounded on the 3rd day. But I stood there at this monument overlooking towards Emmitsburg Road. I was impressed about the area which the 2nd Florida had to fight across. What also impressed me was how close they got to Cemetery Ridge, or this monument on Hancock Avenue. I would invite everybody who goes to the Gettysburg to come up here and take a look at this and look towards the Spangler Woods in the background and get a good impression of just what the 2nd Florida did on July 2nd, 1863.